Hello, everyone, and welcome. I hope you're able to find a seat on your couch, a comfortable one, perhaps the left, right, or middle side. My name is Ilya Tovbis. I'm the artistic and managing director of J by J, which is a program of the Edlavitch DCJCC, and this year brought to you also in partnership with the Bender and Pozas JCCs. So we have a conglomerate of all the DMV area JCCs. I'm thrilled to be bringing you tonight's program around Love and Stuff, of course, with director Judith Helfand, and presented in conversation with the CEO of the Edlavitch DCJCC, Dava Schub. I should note that today is the last day of the festival, and this is our last live event. However, if you want to sneak in one more concert or one more film, you do have until 11:59 p.m. tonight. So do feel free to do that on jxjdc.org. And just as the light of our screens is expiring, of course, the lights of Hanukkah are starting up. So happy Hanukkah to everyone. And I should recommend if you're looking for somebody be outside of your own home to light the candles with, our JCC is going to be lighting the candles as a community for the next 7 nights together. It's free. Join us. It's fun to do the candle lighting. You can find out more on the website at edcjcc.org. But with that preamble, I'd like to just introduce a little bit more formally our speakers and then get out of the way and enjoy a lovely conversation. So director Judith Helfand is a filmmaker and storyteller who is best known for her ability to take the dark worlds of chemical exposure, heedless corporate behavior, and environmental injustice and make them personal, highly charged, and entertaining. 3 of her films have premiered at Sundance with national broadcasts on PBS, HBO, and the Sundance Channel. In addition to The Uprising of 34, co-directed with George Stoney, her films include the Sundance Award-winning and 2-time Emmy-nominated film Blue, A Healthy Baby Girl, as well as Everything's Cool. And she is joined in conversation with, I was going to say our new CEO, but it's not quite as new anymore, Dava Schub, who I'm really excited to have on for this conversation. She joined the Edlavitch DCJCC as our Chief Executive Officer on September the 1st. She had been working and leading JCCs over the past 25 years, most recently and most prominently at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan, where she was the Chief Program Officer, leading and helping to set the vision of the JCC's programs, including many, but also a very vibrant and known film program amongst them. In addition to her professional capacities, Dava has served as the co-chair of BJ/SPSA homeless shelter in New York City and has volunteered at One Heartland, a camp for children and families living with HIV/AIDS for more than a decade, and is mom to a pretty awesome 9-year-old girl, which is fittingly how her bio ends. I'm really excited for this conversation. Again, if by any chance anyone's not seen the film yet, you still can catch it through the end of today. But for those of you that have, I think you'll find this conversation to be quite meaningful, as the film was beautiful and touching and really quite timely. I think we were just talking a little bit briefly about putting out films during COVID perhaps not being ideal, but subject matter wise, in terms of the way we connect and the way we reach one another, there is something quite fitting to have this be our final live program. And with that, I'd love to just hand it over to Dava and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Ilya. Judith, it is a pleasure to be with you tonight on this culminating night of the J by J Festival. First of all, happy Hanukkah. And thank you for taking a moment away from motherhood and life to spend some time with us. Your film is absolutely beautiful, and I look forward to talking to you about it and inviting our viewers to chime in with their questions in the Q&A function on Zoom. So to our viewers, feel free to do that anytime, and I will add your questions to my own throughout this conversation with Judith tonight.
And thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure. And, you know, our loss is their gain, because that's our JCC that you helped create the vision for. So
thank you. And there's a quick snippet in your movie that actually is in the JCC Manhattan, which made me feel very close to home. And I will say I had that feeling throughout the movie. It felt like for me, I am I guess I would say recovering Upper West Sider. I moved from the Upper West Side of Manhattan to Washington, D.C. to take on this role only 3.5-4 months ago. And watching your film felt like, you know, an hour and a half or 2 like back at home. So I really thank you for that. It was wonderful to sort of see my own neighborhood come to life through your moving images. Also, in addition to the Upper West Side connection, we share a common. Our stories are all uniquely our own. But I also had my daughter on my own, and in watching your film, certainly feel connected to pieces of the story that you expressed through the movie. So again, thank you for sharing your journey and for taking time now to chat with me and answer some questions.
Great, I'm looking forward to it.
I guess I would start by saying, in case there are folks who have joined us tonight who have not had a chance to watch your film yet, tell us a bit about Love and Stuff and what motivated you to make this film about your mother, her death, and your own journey to and through the early stages of motherhood.
I mean, the thing that made me really start this in a way was two things. And it's built into the text of the film. My mother very wisely asked me over and over, from around the time that she was diagnosed with cancer, she started to say, you should come home and spend some time with me on the weekends, and we should go through all the stuff. And, I was busy. I was working on a different film called Cook Survival by Zip Code. I had lots of excuses, but even if I did go home, I didn't want to go through stuff with her, because I knew that in a way that was code for, I was just diagnosed with metastatic cancer, and we need to value all of our time together because I'm going to die. And I didn't want to deal with it. And her way of preparing me and helping me figure out like what that was going to mean was this invitation to go through stuff. And, so I didn't do it. I put it off and I put it off and I put it off and I put it off. And then unfortunately, like when I was finally like, okay, I guess I'm ready to do it, is when she got so sick that she needed to go into hospice. So, and then, I had the good fortune of being able to come home and move in with her and create that hospice and create this incredibly loving, even fun environment, which, now in this time of COVID, if only everybody who has a loved one who's at the end of their life was able to like be with them physically, and to be in the same room and to have all of that time to sort of think about this. So, it wasn't until I was home during that period of time when there was no time to go through stuff, because it was just time to be with mom and to make her as comfortable as possible, that I picked up the iPhone and I started to shoot. And I had promised her, like, I had stopped making movies with my mom. I'd made so many films, A Healthy Baby Girl and Blue Vinyl and Ekveld. And she was like, look, go deal with climate change, leave me alone, And I think there were probably a lot of interesting movies to make. The life that she rebuilt after my father died, and the way that she dealt with that grief. That would have been a really interesting film. Her being president of her shul would have been a really interesting film. But I had promised her I wouldn't do that. But at the very end, I picked up the camera and I started to document the hospice. And I started to kind of keep a running log of what was going on Facebook. And I started gathering all of these friends and Facebook friends, and this whole community of people were watching as we created what we like to call, Shea Helfand Hospice, and were thanking me in a lot of ways for giving them access into this thing that they were terrified of too. So I think, I started shooting, and then I was left with, then she died, and then we had to go through this stuff, and we had like a month to do it, and I couldn't bear going through that stuff. And my history is, when I can't bear to do something and it's really scary and it's really painful, I usually pick up a camera and start to try to make sense and make art out of the thing that I'm most scared of and that I find most painful. And then I try to bring in as much humor as possible. So I think, in answer to your question, it was this universal rite of passage of, and the gift of getting to be with my mother at the end of their life, and the horror of having to face all that stuff, and realizing that the offer that she had given me, which was to go through the stuff, was really a wise offer. you know, it would have been a beautiful and fun thing to have done that with her. It would have given her a lot of peace. We would have been left with stories, not just stuff. And so all of those things combined made me want to start making this film.
You did it beautifully. I'm curious, just a small question. Did she know, or did you know that Love and Stuff was being made while she was still alive? Or did the origins that happen after
No,
her passing?
she didn't know. No, I mean, you know, we have a long history, my mother and I, as you could see from the film, of using a camera between the two of us to help us deal with really, really hard stuff. So
There was a scene where she called it your umbilical cord. I love that.
right. So that's from this movie that we made called A Healthy Baby Girl. And I used the camera to help get through a very, very, very hard and really painful, horrible period of time when I had cancer caused by this drug that she took when she was pregnant with me called DES. So it wasn't her way, you know, to like process my cancer and my not being able to have a kid, and my grief and her guilt. Like that was not her way for me to have a camera. Like that would have not been her way of choice to grieve and to heal and to get through that period of time. But it was mine, and we made a beautiful movie together, and it was a real love letter to her, and it was like my way of saying, like, I'm going to be okay, and we're going to be okay, and you know, that cancer is not going to get inside of us and inside this relationship. It's not going to happen. We're going to be okay. So I guess so she knew I was making that movie. She knew that I made Blue Vinyl. She knew that I made the movie about when they sold their house. But this one, you know, she knew that if I picked up the camera, it meant that our talking with each other at this very, very potent, poignant, painful moment in time when it was finite. Like you know, she and I both knew that she was going to die within, you know, a couple of months or a couple of weeks. I mean, we didn't really know when that was going to happen. So she let, you know, it was sort of an understood thing. Like, okay, this is going to help you get through this. I don't know what you're going to do with it, but if this is going to help you get through this and it's going to help you figure out how to live without your mother, then okay. But then I called the crew in when it was time to start packing up her place. And I decided at that time that I would make a short film called Love and Stuff, which I did with the New York Times. And the goal was for it to come out on Mother's Day. And that was kind of, for me, it was like to protect myself. Okay, it's going to be my first motherless Mother's Day. I'm going to make this short in tribute to my mom and as a gift to everybody, really, especially those who still have their parents. You know, it's like a little, hey, you know, go through the stuff. It'll be useful. But little did I know that 7 months to the day that my mom passed away, I would get this phone call about Theo. So I wound up not having a motherless Mother's Day because Theo arrived on Pesach, which was extraordinary. And so, you know, I was like finishing this little short film with, you know, a 2-week-old infant in the house.
Before you get to Theo, that's an amazing part of the story. I was struck by the piece of the film where you share your own journey with cancer. You mentioned before that your mother was given DES while pregnant, and that led to your own cancer journey, and essentially you paying the price in your adulthood. And after the film documents you going through a hysterectomy, I was struck by your mother's line in the film that your productive organs were now gone. And so the fact that the film later leads to your stage of life as a mother, I'm curious, you know, it's a nuanced difference, your productive organs, your reproductive organs, but what that piece of the potential of motherhood, the loss of motherhood, the expectation of motherhood was between you and your mother. And I imagine also as someone who was, you know, in my 30s and not married, and your mother longs for sort of a life that she expects for you, and that's not happening. How that sort of played out in your relationship as she saw the surgery alter things, potentially in a way that was unchangeable, but obviously in a way that you surmounted, maybe differently than she expected you to.
Yeah, I mean, it was that, you know, that was a hard thing. I mean, I think she, I mean, that was, you know, I kind of like dove into making as many films as possible. I think there was a part of me that was, you know, terrified that I was going to get a recurrence, and that the smartest thing I could do in a way was to make art and make meaningful art and commit myself to, you know, using my love of storytelling to support environmental justice, and to use my own experience with this toxic chemical exposure, you know, in any way that I could, in a way to make it sort of more meaningful. I mean, the way to make something that feels that has harmed you, and you know, it's like, how do you make meaning out of, you know, corporate greed and you know, corporate malfeasance and the long-term impact of toxic chemical exposure. It's like, if you turn it into a good story and that story is useful to others who are dealing with these issues, or it moves people to make policy change in some weird way, and so, you know, it sort of says, okay, well, I'm sorry I got this cancer. It would have been great to be able to have biological children if that was when I wanted to, and if I chose to. You know, it would have been great if none of this had happened. But if it had to happen, on some weird level, I was like glad that it happened to me, because I could use it in some way. I could turn it into something that was meaningful. You know, and you know, making art out of pain and suffering and or greed, you know, or it's an important thing. So my mother got to see that over a long period of time, and I think, you know, she ultimately realized, wow, you know, like you turned a corner, you made, you know, lemonade out of lemons, you've made art out of this, you've used this in this very meaningful way. So that gave her, you know, that in some ways, I think on some level, it helped make up for a lot of that pain and suffering and her disappointment for me.
And then, so as you mentioned a moment ago in the film, 7 months to the day after your mom's death, you got the call. I love the line that someone said in the movie, the woman at the hospital, she's Jewish. We think your mother sent her. Just tell us what that moment was like. I can only imagine. I can't even imagine.
That was the person from the adoption agency. I mean, in some ways, I mean, I think my mother did send her. You know, I mean, it was crazy.
I think so too.
On Passover, I mean, you know, as I say in the film, I mean, I was on my way to this Seder that I dreaded the most, and it was like the first one without her, and you know, I was so sad and so depressed, and showing up very, very late for this Seder that I promised I would help my brother, you know, like put together and be useful at. And, you know, I think, you know, I was supposed to get there like, you know, I'll get there at 10 and I'll help you all day, I promise. And, you know, I got there at 6 and I showed up at the door and I said, I need your landline. My phone's gonna die. There's a baby for me. I have to make this choice. I have 3 hours. Give me the phone. So and then, you know, I sat with my entire extended family trying to decide. Amazingly enough, I didn't just say yes. I really had to decide. But, you know, I finally said yes, and they said, Dianu, call them.
Why is it night different from all other nights if you got your daughter? So speaking of your daughter, tell us about Theo and being her mom. How old is she now? And I guess I can't help but ask if there's, I'm sure there's not one, but if there's one story or one thing about Theo that you most wish you could just speed dial your mom and tell her about or share with her.
Oh my goodness. Well, so she's 6, and we have spent more time together in the last, 8 months than in her whole life. What she's, it's interesting because she's very nostalgic, oddly enough, for a lot of the things that I kept. She understands, so, here. Well, so this is an egg cup. I mean, it's an interesting thing. One of the reasons why I had such trouble like letting go of this stuff, and then why I really wanted to kind of incorporate my mom's stuff into my house in a way that would be really meaningful, was because I thought, okay, well then she'll be around. Like, we'll have her, she'll be around. I don't think I realized how useful in certain ways that around would become. So there was a moment during this pandemic when, I was making a lot of pancakes. She wanted pancakes. And then she really wanted to be in charge of the syrup. And she just loves, she loves abundance, and it's like pouring and it's too much. And it's just like, I want to do it. And she's very independent. And, it was crazy. It's like, I can't believe we're fighting over syrup. This is crazy. And that's exactly when I would want to speed dial my mother. And so, emotionally, I speed dial my mother and she says, egg cup. And I'm like, egg cup? You save the egg cups, use the egg cups. It's like, let her have her independence, but you give her the amount that you want, but put it in the egg cup and say like, here, grandma says this is exactly how much to use. So, I mean, it was just an egg cup, but it's actually incredibly, incredibly useful. And so, she knows and she'll be like, oh, hi, grandma. And then she'll pour it. So, over this, during the pandemic, which was just, especially the 3 months when school first shut down, and it was just traumatic for all of us. We were doing all this online learning and online art, and it was not easy, and she didn't really want to do it with me. But so there was a moment when the art teacher says, okay, well, you need a straight edge. And she looks at me and she says, grandpa's straight edge. And she runs in here and she's like, Mom, I get it. And, it's like straight edge is there on this thing, this wall of tchotchkes that sort of come from the house that a lot of them are in the movie, and she uses this ivory straight edge, and, you could just still see it. There's a little bit of green Sharpie. She's like, this is my grandpa's. This was my Zadie's. He used straight edges all the time. I'm going to use it, and then at some point she looks at me horrified and she said, oh my God, Mama. Yeah, you could almost see it. She's like, I got Sharpie on it. And I said, it's okay. Like, these things are to be used. Your grandpa would love that. So, these crazy little things have become very useful, and useful at moments when I really, when I would want to speed dial to say like, I'm losing my patience, or I don't know how to do this, or how would you do this? Or, like they're extending themselves in the way that grandparents would, that loving, patient workaround that only a grandparent could probably do. And, at that moment when you're going to rip your hair out.
The egg cup arrives.
Yeah, the egg cup arrives, or the straight edge enters the picture, and it's incredibly sweet, and they're very present that way.
Beautiful. So going to the stuff, the film is called Love and Stuff, and boy, was there stuff. Her toothbrush, her piano, her dentures, her mahjong set. Tell us about the stuff that remains now. Some you've mentioned, the egg cup and the straight edge, but also how you managed to disentangle the love from the stuff, if you were, or is all the stuff that's not in your New York City apartment sitting in a storage unit somewhere. I love your friend's line, who he says, this is not an archaeological dig, Judith. This is your life. And so I imagine that's when you made the big move to get some of the stuff, at least out of your immediate small New York City space. And I'm wondering, again, what remains, how you made those choices, and how much of it you were able to disconnect from without losing the love. And again, how much of it just sort of sits someplace else, waiting for your next stage of reckoning.
Well, it's funny that you say this because just about a month ago, my brother sent over all the elephants and they're in boxes in the living room. We haven't unpacked them yet. Which, I didn't think I don't know I didn't know where they were going to go. I mean, I think I sent a whole bunch of clothes that I couldn't bear to part with to this woman who makes quilts out of clothing or t-shirts and stuff like that. So there's a quilt and she's gonna make a whole bunch of I don't know, I guess tablecloths for my nieces and my nephew. They don't know this yet. If they're listening.
They'll love it. Happy Hanukkah, they'll love it.
Happy Hanukkah, yeah, it's gonna come late, but you're gonna love it. So, I mean, that was like one, what's still around? I mean, I say, there's china, I haven't used it yet. There's, my grandmother's Passover dishes, which I haven't exactly used yet, but I have. There's still some boxes of stuff that I have yet to deal with for sure. But I got so busy taking care of Theo that the stuff kind of changed. The stuff changed. I mean, some of that, I saved. I hope I saved the good stuff. I guess I saved the good stuff. I mean, there's still. I mean, I didn't totally take Andrew Mellon's advice. I mean, I did save some things that are still some archaeological digs that, I did that she and I will go through at some point. I'm not, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff. And there's still a lot of, there's still boxes that are in my brother's house that say, too painful to go through later. So later has
Stuff and love are entangled. I mean, in beautiful ways and in complicated ways. And that's part
very
of it.
entangled. I just want to say that there's a very good friend of mine is on this chat, Rabbi Fred Sherlander Dabb. It's either Rabbi Fred or it's Minna. And then there's an old friend of my cousin's, Sharon Zamor. So if you have any questions, I see you.
Nice, jump in. I'll throw out one last question from me. And then if others have questions, let's take a few of them, I guess. I noted when watching the movie that I think it was Simchat Torah, you promised your mom on what looked to be her deathbed that next year you would dance. And I'm wondering if you fulfilled on that promise and if you could describe the journey from mourning to dancing, because clearly being Theo's mother was part of the dance. But I'm curious how you.
Well, we did. I mean, we were at, her baby naming at shul, those were the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that we were streaming in. And it was an interesting thing because I joined Romamu literally 2 weeks before she died. And I did that because I hadn't done that. I hadn't joined a shul when my father died. And, and I had to kind of produce my own shiva, and it was hard. It was really hard. And my mother said to me, promise me, that between now, just promise me that in the next couple of years, stop shopping and join a shul, And, but I actually didn't do it until 2 weeks before she died. But it gave me so much, it gave me a great deal of, both pleasure and, and peace to be able to say to her, like, see that shul that I'm, that I'm streaming in for you for your last Yom Kippur and your last Rosh Hashanah. Like, those are the people that's where I'll say Kaddish. Like, that's the community I'll be with. So I'm not going to be alone. Don't worry. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of amazing to, have this, to have, Thea was named at that shul, like, the June after my mother died. And, and she was with me for her first Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur there. And, and we danced. And, and that's, her second word, I think her first word, it was hi, oi, and amen.
My daughter's first word, you know what it was?
What?
Dada. Didn't have one. Sometimes the words are meaningful and sometimes they're not.
Yeah,
but
well,
your daughter's words are and actually your story where your daughter said oi, I remember that being sort of, it seemed like a powerful moment for you on your own health and wellness journey as you were feeling the weight of your body and
right.
thinking about how long you could live for and with her. And when she would see you schlepping up and down the stairs and she would,
well, she didn't see
breathing,
me.
said, oi.
She felt it, right? Because she was right here. Right. So, I mean, yeah, so that oi was like, she was right there, so, I mean, now we laugh about it, every once in a while she'll be like, oi, it's my first word,
Oi. Thank you for the film. I see that your friend Sharon is here. I don't know if she has any questions, but I'm mindful this is precious time, both with with Theo, with the dripping lights of your Hanukkah menorah. If there's last sort of things that I didn't get to in the questions that you want to share with us, I'm happy to hear them. I also, you were sharing with me before the Q&A went live, that it is hard to let a film go into the world in a time when you don't see the audiences. So I wonder if there's any piece of that you want to reflect on, of what it feels like to kind of share your story with the world in a moment of COVID, and what you're longing for on the other side. So I feel like when we look at the lights and the candles and we think about hope, I'm feeling optimistic, although it's not tomorrow or the next day, that there is something better around one or two or three corners. And as a filmmaker, you will see your audiences, but right now you're just seeing me. So I'm wondering what you're missing and how that feels like when your film is in the world.
Well, I mean, there is a question. How would you deal with people that want you to go through the things quickly? I am dealing with that a bit. Yeah, that's hard, Kevin. I mean, I guess it all depends. I mean, we had to go through things quickly because, we didn't own that apartment. We were paying rent on it. My brother was like, this is crazy. We got to get out of here. It's like, you can't take months in here. This is not, this is not a 3-month, 4-month, a year-long thing. Like, you just got to do it. And in some ways it was useful to have that time frame. But what I did, the things that I couldn't, the things that I wanted more time with, I put them in the box and I took them home. So that is one way to do it, which is to say, okay, I'll just take it home and I'll deal with it on my own time in my own space. I think it's a hard thing. I don't know what I would say. I mean, I think, one thing I would say is to say, why do you, it'd be, I mean, do you have to do they need to do it quickly? Do you have to do it quickly? I know you can't respond back to me. I think that if it all depends what if you could take some of that stuff home and you can buy yourself some time that way, then maybe do that. Or maybe make a deal with them, get a little more, maybe, you can't do it as quickly as, you might want, maybe you guys could just barter around time or find out why they need for it to go fast.
Because you might want that egg cupper that's straight edge someday.
Right.
So she says, thank you, it was helpful.
I hope so. What do I want? Well, what I'm hoping to do with the movie in the long run, and particularly in the next, bunch of months, is to, I've been doing these workshops called Love Stuff and Zoom, and they're specifically for to support folks and to give people kind of an interesting model and an interesting way of spending time with their loved ones on Zoom. So, I think that it's really, really critical to talk about end of life. I think it's even if it's painful, the last thing you want to do is like wait till the very, very, very last minute. And I think our loved ones really value that and want that as well. And I think given this moment when end of life can often come when you least expect it and very quickly, and before you are able to make plans, it's like if you have the time and the space and the Zoom, you should use it. And a stuff review is a really compelling and interesting way to both like get to know your loved ones, help to start to process that stuff. So, maybe Kevin, you're not like left with all of it because you actually understand what it is and you've gone through it and you've collected and mined some of those great stories and you've had that really good time. And then maybe it doesn't make going through the stuff as painful as it would be otherwise. So I'm encouraging people to think about this time and this space and these Zooms. How do you use this time in a way that's meaningful? And, is it possible to like start going through stuff on Zoom and use that to kind of generate important stories and have those important and meaningful discussions? And I think it is.
I saw a bit in the movie you going through stuff with other people, and I wonder if it's almost a form of Shiva, of whether it's someone, Kevin, in your life or Judith in yours, who knows the deceased loved one, or someone who doesn't. If it's someone who knows the deceased loved one, then you're sharing the journey. If it's someone who doesn't, it's your chance to tell the stories because you remember like when she wore that skirt that you're never going to want to wear again because it doesn't fit you, or the veil that she wore and what that reminds you of. I think that living through those stories brings connection to the stuff, but also might let you disentangle from it because the story can both live with the stuff and separate from it. That's the social worker in me, but I think so.
Oh, you're a social worker. So, I mean, I don't know yet. I mean, I did one workshop so far, and I don't know if people will really like take me up on this idea and spend time with their elders and sort of do this thing and, see, there's the picture, there's the thing, then they understand it. I just think, we need to be able to spend time with people that we love in meaningful ways. And if you're separated, you need to figure out how to do that. And I think going through stuff is both practical and meaningful and historical. And, like I like to say, start with the meat grinder and end with the do not resuscitate order.
A few more questions in the chat I'm going to throw out as you're sharing those things. One, someone asked you to compare the scene in the film when you were in the moment with your daughter, her moment versus sharing the past moments through the objects. I don't know if I understand that one. Sorry, I'll read the whole thing. I've been a clutterbuster for 20 plus years. Many of my clients who have the most difficulty deciding and letting things go tell me they fear that without the objects, they will have no memories. Your thoughts on that? And then it says, compare the scene in the film when you were in the moment with your daughter, her moment, versus sharing the past through the objects.
Okay. I don't know if I understand the second part of that question.
You can skip it or I can go on to another one. Up to you.
Okay. But letting go, they tell me they fear that without the object, they will have no memories. I know for sure I think it's, I think that some of the objects are really important and they need them and others they don't, but I can understand that. I do. I can understand that. I can understand that. I do know, there's this other thing beyond the objects, right? I mean, there's just like the feeling of your mother's eyes when she would smile, or I mean, now, now that I'm a mother, I experience my mother and feel her and remember things in ways through my relationship with my kid, and in a way, it's much more vivid in a lot of ways than any of these objects are. But I don't know. I mean, I like holding on to things, but I recognize that holding on to too many things is a big, huge problem. And
They look beautiful, they look beautiful in your home.
and if it gets in the way of your life, that's a big, huge problem. They just should hold on to a few things.
Two more questions I see. One about grieving your father's death, and the question from an anonymous film watcher. Both the person comments that I love the movie, and then asks, was grieving your father's death similar? How did your mother deal with his death and absence? And did you repeat any of those
well,
ways of being?
Well, how did my mother grieve my father's death? I mean, she was really, really, really sad, really, really, really sad and really lonely. And she had she spent a lot of time the first year feeling really bad about little things, like, oh, your dad wanted to go outside the last week of his life, or like there's one day he really wanted to go feel the wind, and I was afraid that if he would get too chilled and too cold, and I said no. And she was like, and now, all I could think of is like, why didn't I let him experience the wind? Every time I feel the wind, I get so sad, and I feel like I should have given him the wind. And so, but I think my mother's way of dealing with it was, joining clubs at the library and going to, she belonged to a bereavement group, and they became really, really, really good friends. And that was really key to her. I mean, for my mom, it was, she had just moved to this lovely new apartment with my dad, and they hadn't even really finished unpacking, and they hadn't put any pictures up on the walls. And then my father got terribly, terribly sick. And so, after my father died, we had to help her unpack and like put pictures on the walls and like really move into this new home and move into a new neighborhood and into a new world that was totally new. Like, it was a new place. I mean, my brother lived there. It was New Rochelle, my brother and sister-in-law. So like my mother had to kind of like she had to like reacquaint herself with herself. As she said to me, I'll never forget, she said, I was 18 when I married your dad. I moved out of my parents' house and I moved in with him. So I've never lived alone. I've never really been on my own. And I have to relearn how to do everything. And she did. And I know that's the one movie I'm sorry I didn't make. It was like watching her watching her go through that grief and embrace life was really extraordinary. So Fred said,
yeah, I was going to read your
follow-up about Judith, we'd love to hear more about the good sides of giving stuff away, the gratification of helping others, the green angle, the lightness of getting less encumbered. Did you experience that too? And can you share more? Well, we gave away her bedroom set and the dining room table, and, all of that went to this antique shop that was connected to the hospital where my father had passed away, and my mother, that was another thing that she did. She volunteered at this place. So it meant a lot to her for the stuff to go there. So, I was happy because she was happy, like she wanted her stuff to go there. So that's the other like really good reason to like work through all this stuff with your parents, because they could tell you things that you wouldn't know otherwise. So, I brought a lot of her clothing to this place called Our Children, and it's a wonderful organization that was set up by some really amazing nuns whose mission was to support women in prison who had children. And so this became this they created these buildings where women with children who were coming out of prison and who were returning citizens would have a place to live and a supportive environment and a way to start back. And they created these shops where people donate clothing, and then, really nice clothing. And then the women often, people buy stuff there, and then proceeds go to support this community, or the women go there. So I brought all my mom's work clothes there. So that felt like she would have loved that. So that felt like a really smart and a good thing to do. But Fred, I could, that helps. Those were very sweet things to do. And I think whenever you could figure out ways, to put the stuff in places or with people who can utilize it and embrace it, it's a great thing. Actually, a couple of my mom's chairs and some furniture that she really loved, we just gave to Denise, who's in the movie, who has been helping me take care of Theo for years. And so we're like, both of us, she and I are both so excited. It's like, oh, the chairs and the break front are going to you. It's perfect. So, so that's a good thing, and I probably could do a little more of that. I mean, that's what now I need to start doing that with Theo's things.
I can help you with that. I'm a good purger. Having lived in a New York City apartment too long with a young child, when she was out of the size of clothes, I just, like, when she was sleeping, I would sneak it out of the house and pass it along to somebody else.
Really?
Yeah, I think actually in some ways New York City is a gift, because there's so little space that if you have basements and storage and stuff, you can justify packing it away until tomorrow or the next tomorrow and the next tomorrow. And my teeny little Upper West Side apartment just didn't allow for it. And so I got in very good habits early. But I get that it's complicated, because someday she'll wonder, where her first tooth is, and I won't know. So you will have her tooth and your mother's dentures.
No.
I will have none of it. We'll compare notes someday.
Look, the other thing is that the making of the movie was the way that I processed the stuff. So the way that Dan Gold, who's an extraordinary cinematographer, the way that he so artfully shot the stuff, and the way that we staged it, and the way that we put the music to it, and the way that, David Cohen, who not only was one of the editors and the core editor, but he co-directed the movie with me, and we wrote the narration together. Like when he figured out, and then, when he and our other editor, when they figured out like how to use the stuff as these portals so that we could go between the past and the present, and between the old archival footage and the present. And, sometimes you would see the stuff back in the day and then in my apartment, and like somehow, that was so satisfying for me, that the movie sort of helped imprint all of these memories that I had. They made it just the making of the movie, and the process of making the movie, and going through all the material, and going through the footage, and talking about it, and working it through, and unworking it through, and re-editing, and that was really like, that's where I really worked out the grief. That's, so that took a long time, but that's how I did it. And now I have this text, and now I have this very dynamic relationship with my mom. And I think it's because of this film in a lot of ways.
You didn't only do it, you did it beautifully. So thank you for this film, for sharing your mom, for sharing your story. To Theo tonight on the first night of Hanukkah, for sharing you with us. And it's really been wonderful to be able to kind of go on this journey with you through the film, and then tonight to have a chance to speak with you and share your words with folks who are here now and those who will watch it later. And while we're closing out the J by J Festival, I just want to thank Ilya and Alex and wish them Mazel Tov on an incredible first, and in some ways I want to say hopefully last ever all virtual J by J festival, but it was incredible. I mean, we had probably 3,500 households, over 5,000 people joining us this week to enjoy incredible films like yours, to be part of these Q&A talkbacks and special events. And I know it's not the way that you would imagine your film being watched or being in conversation with your audience, but as a person who was in your audience yesterday on my own couch, watching the film, I assure you it was meaningful and it was personal, and I thank you.
Well, I have to say, I mean, I think if there had to be, I mean, I think this is a good pandemic film. I think that if you do watch it at home, you're watching it sort of surrounded by stuff and photographs and family and relationship. And so I think it works in relationship to watching at home. So, so towards that end, you know, if the film has, you know, if a film makes people want to go home and call their mother or their father or their loved one or their aunts, or like connect with their family, or think about, you know, life and the end of life and how to make the most of this period of time and how to use our Zooms wisely, then I'm really glad I could offer that.
Yeah. And your next film release will be together in our theater and other theaters. But until then, stay home, stay safe, and happy Hanukkah.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi
Nice
Fred.
being with you.
Bye.